First, I would like to thank Karen Maxim, the museum administrator here at the Mendocino County Museum, and the whole staff and team for inviting us to share this incredible story of the Back to the Land movement here in Mendocino County and beyond. Also, I would like to give a shout out to Chad Ray with his Digital Activism Productions. His programming can be seen on EmeraldTriangleTV.com. Please give it a look. I'm so honored to be here today at our county museum sharing some of the Cannabis and Counterculture Archive. Over the past years, we have exhibited at multiple Emerald Cups, farmers markets, and most recently, the Emerald City Pop-Up Museum in downtown Willits. This story, our collective cannabis counterculture story, its time has come. What is being displayed here today in this exhibit is but a fraction of what lives in the ever-growing Cannabis Counterculture Archive. A shout out to the Dr. Bronner's Foundation for helping underwrite this exhibit. I also want to extend eternal gratitude to the Cryo Winery, who have donated over the years to help move this narrative forward. Our intention with this archive is to continue to collect, preserve, and exhibit memorabilia detailing the story of cannabis and counterculture movements. And now I would like to turn the mic over to Ann Waters, who will introduce our guest panelists, this Back to the Land generational storytelling.
Richard forgot to tell you that it's a very important thing. He wanted everyone to taste some granola today as original. Hippie foods and granola, not the really kind where you can find stuff in it. This is just the oats version. Very simple. It's in there. So my name is Annie Waters. I'm Richard's partner, and I worked with him on building this exhibit. But his collection, which is huge, he's being very modest, is this is just a fraction of it. It's his life work. It's truly what, he got his bliss. Like some people never find what's your bliss, whatever you want to say, call it that great masterwork of your life. And for Richard, his bliss is not only owning all these books, having read them, and really sharing them over the time with people. So what you have here is a master historian, and so I encourage you to ask him questions after the talk about any of the things that you're interested in the exhibit. So I am lucky enough to be able to introduce this panel, and it's a tough job because I'm going to also try to keep everybody from talking too long, because we know we got some great storytellers up here. So with all that said, the goal of this panel is to tell the origin stories and have this generational family discussion about arriving in Mendocino on rural land. We'll hear 3 experiences from around Mendocino County. So I'll say their names now, and then you'll know who they are. So this is Mark Rodriguez.
Donald.
Oh, I'm sorry. Mark and Donald are next to each other. Sorry. Start with Donald Rodriguez and his daughter Chia Rodriguez. Some of the founders of Greenfield Ranch in the south of our county. And then next to them is Mark O'Neill with his son Casey O'Neill, and they live on the northern part of the county up Bell Springs Road. And they also help the whole community. And on the end here is our own Emmy Good from Willits, and she lives on what we're going to call several different names. Timberline, what do you call them?
Troll Ridge.
Troll Ridge. She lives on Troll Ridge with her husband. So.
Just moved to town.
Just moved to town last week.
Okay. Across from the post office.
So we're going to give them a chance.
What happens after you get rich?
Her mom's house. It's her mom's house. She's been there that long. Okay, so let's start out with Don. Would you like to tell your story about how you chose Mendocino County and where you came from and what happened after you got here.
Well, my name is Don, and Don Rodriguez, and I was teaching in Germany, 1976. I came to Mendocino on vacation, and a young friend of mine who had been a student of mine introduced me to the ranch. She said, I know this hippie ranch, and her sister had owned a parcel, and she was trying to become a veterinarian, so she sold her parcel, and did not stay living on the ranch. Well, anyway, I had come for vacation, and her sister had said, let's visit this place. So we went up to the ranch and got to introduce it, did a little tour, and I decided that it just was the neatest place. You know, I was a Johnny-come-lately because the thing started in 72, and I was in 76. So the people who were there before us had done some incredible work because the roads were trashed. There was really no property lines. The young people who decided to invest in the ranch just took a map and drew squares on it and said, okay, this is your 200 acres, this is 200, 200, 200. Well, I went to the ranch house, and there was a 3x5 card on the bulletin board said 50 acres for sale at $125 an acre. So my friend and I said, well, okay, put us in there. So I got on the phone and called my old job in Germany. I told the German principal of the high school I had been teaching, and I said, I found a little place I think is close to paradise, and I'm going to not come back to teach again in Germany. I'm resigning. And they said, well, don't worry about it. We got thousands of applications for teachers to come to Europe and teach, right? So I got on the phone and called the guy up with a 3x5 card, and I said, you still trying to sell this? And he said, yeah. I said, well, I got it, I'll take it. So we immediately, right there, decided we want to come in. So we went ahead and bought the place, and then my folks lived in San Diego, so I went back to San Diego, we all went back to San Diego, and he sold his family's property because his grandfather had left him a piece, and my parents were still alive, but I was not interested in living in the old homestead in San Diego. San Diego's not a bad city because you got the ocean and you got the mountains and you got Mexico's right there. You can go up to the snow in the wintertime. So San Diego's a pretty neat little city. Not a little city. But anyway, we moved up, just lock, stock, and barrel, just loaded all our stuff up, came up to the ranch, sat her down, and I had one of those huge tarps that they put on 16-wheelers. Okay, so I strung a wire between two big trees, put this big old tarp up, and it was big enough to make a floor, the whole tent, lived in it for a year, and started building. But my dad was a carpenter, and they came to visit one day, and he says, and she was pregnant.
No, my mom was.
She was
with me.
She was with her mom and I had decided to have a baby. So anyway, my folks came up and then my dad said, "Go get some wood. You got to build a house," because he was thinking about babies being raised in a tent, right? So anyway, we moved up there and started building. And then the place was incredible. You know, I don't know how to explain it, except I remembered my first solstice party was 300 naked hippies. Nobody was wearing clothes. In fact, if you were wearing clothes, you were thought to be a little weird. Because, you know, one solstice party, we were all little kids, everybody's running around naked. This van pulls up. Guys get out and they start unloading their cameras like this, right? They start setting it up by the fence. They're all clothed. They didn't take their clothes off. So a couple of us went up to them and said, "Who are you guys?" I think they were from Sweden or somewhere. How they ever heard about Greenfield Ranch from Sweden? But they wanted to take movies or film of this hippie co-op. Okay, this whole scene was going crazy all over the world. Well, anyway, so they were taking pictures, and I went with another guy up to the group, and I said, "What are you guys doing?" They said, "Well, we're taking these movies, making a film." And I said, "Well, okay, but take your clothes off." You can't just come up here all dressed up and just start filming us. Join the party. So anyway, they took their clothes off, and they were Europeans. They were from Europe. They didn't have any qualms about it because I guess they thought they didn't even think about it. They just started filming. So anyway, the solstice parties turned out to be quite an event every year.
Is that summer solstice or winter solstice?
Summer solstice.
They were closed in the winter.
So we had a nice introduction to the ranch, and the party scene was fantastic. The old ranch house was our playground and our community center. We had 400 acres of common land. So it turned out to be quite an experience, and it's been going on ever since I moved up there in '76, and I'm happy to be there yet. And she has raised 2 boys, and her husband. They've done an incredible project of their own in the cannabis industry. They were kind of like, Chia was the one who went to the city meetings and got in all the arguments and all the stuff that happened that we were so glad to be a part of. Thank you.
Well, hi everybody. Thanks for having me. I'm Chia Rodriguez, and I'm a second-generation Greenfield rancher. And like my dad said, I have 2 boys as well, and we also live still on Greenfield Ranch, but just on a different parcel of land. And so, let's see, I was born in 1979, and I was born in the little cabin that my dad was referring to that was built when my mom was pregnant. And so, you know, we had midwives there. Of course, the whole community was kind of involved in every birth of every baby. And so I meet people still that are like, "Oh, I was there when you were born." I'm like, "Oh." So it was kind of a party, and everybody would, you know, bring potluck food and do all the, you know, helping around the house and everything when babies were born. And so there was quite a community there. When I was born, there was tons of children. I mean, really, there was sort of this bloom that was happening during that time, and everybody was moving out into the woods and trying to homestead and you know, but also retain this really important piece of community and common ground. And so we had the Greenfield Ranch House. Just to give a little context, we have 5,600 acres plus or minus on Greenfield Ranch, and we have about I think about 28 miles of road. We had maybe 300 original residents with lots of little homesteads on each of those parcels. So, you know, for instance, our original parcel where my father and his land partner bought 50 acres. We have like 25 people on our deed. It's kind of the way that it is with the tenants in common situation on Greenfield Ranch. So, you know, it's widely spread out, and I access Greenfield through the back of like what is now called the Flocana Institute, or you know what was, anyways. And so it used to be the old Fetzer Winery, and but you can also access Greenfield if you go out Ore Springs Road, and you can kind of almost get to the hot springs out that way. And so it's a really long stretch of land and wide variety of, you know, sort of territory. I live right now on the top of a hill that overlooks Redwood Valley, but where I was born and the land that my dad and my brother live on has more redwoods, has a lot more water, sort of in the central part of Greenfield Ranch, near the pond and near the ranch house, which was kind of the community center as well. So when I was growing up, we had some trails that would go towards the community pond, and so my dad would just, you know, you just take your snake stick and you go. And hopefully you don't run into a snake or a mountain lion or something on the way. And so, you know, there was no phones, there was no way to communicate with your parents, you just kind of went. And we were joking earlier before the panel that all of us children are kind of like feral, free-range children is what I call it. And so, yeah, we just kind of, you know, we'd go find your friends and neighbors, and you'd go on an adventure, and you'd go down to the creek or go to the pond, or you would end up at somebody's house, and your parents might not even know where you were. And if you spent the night, they'd hope that you weren't lost in the woods somewhere. But that was sort of the community vibe, you know, back then, that all the adults kind of paid attention to the children, and if you ended up at somebody's house, they fed you and they clothed you and they, you know, made sure you were okay. And it's still kind of that way, though things have changed quite a lot. Of course, we have a lot of the OGs now getting to that age where they can't really maintain their land anymore. It's a lot of work, you know, to maintain acreage, right? And so we have a lot of people coming back, like the second generation. There's a big resurgence that has happened in the last, you know, few years. And so, you know, I'm a second generation. My children are obviously the third generation. And we have a lot of folks coming back and sort of reviving the properties of their parents, and, you know, new owners and things like that coming into the mix. So the vibe has changed a lot since I was a child, but you know, people have their careers now. They went back to town and back to work and doing those kinds of things as their kids grew up. But really, I think we still maintain the same values and try to live, you know, a sustainable off-grid lifestyle and all that, like many of you probably do here in Mendo as well. So thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Hi, I'm Emmy Good, and actually, yesterday marks the day that we decided 44 years ago to move to Willits. I decided on my 40th birthday that I'd lived my first 40 years in Southern California, and then it was going to be the next 40 years, hopefully, to live in Northern California. And we decided, and I have to say that, you know, I was really, I grew up very privileged, and I was graduated from UCLA, and I taught in Santa Monica, and then I instantly started having children, and I had 2 boys right away. And at that point, I still was working, and I worked for the State Identified Gifted Program, and I was developing curriculum and so on. And I had a really good job, my husband had a really good job, and we had a really big, beautiful home that everybody would aspire to, with the swimming pools and wonderful tree houses and all kinds of things like that that were really wonderful. But we had gotten to the point where the helicopters were flying overhead every day. Everybody had to have a security, you know, thing. The cars were driving by every day, and I felt like I was in a prison, and I'm going like, you know, this is just not the life I really want. I was commuting on the freeway for maybe an hour each direction, and I had to entertain my kids who were going to school on the same side of the hill. We were living at that point in Sherman Oaks, and one day, I have to put this in there because it ties into today, we were right across from a watershed, which was really quite beautiful, Nobody could build on it, so there were deer and there were things like that where we could just walk across the street and start hiking, so you didn't feel like you were just living in the city. And one day my husband and the boys were up hiking and they saw something kind of shiny in the ground and they started digging it out and they found a prototype. Absolutely. This was in the early 70s. We had no idea what prototype was and so on, but we could tell what it was. And at that point, we were already indulging, so it wasn't a shock. And we actually used the little prototype. And it was really a shock later on to, come up here and find out that this was the home of prototype. And not only the home of prototype, eventually we ended up having a toy shop and here in town, and we secretly carried all of the things for the prototype people. And they were under the counter, and people would come into the shop, and usually they were Europeans, frankly. I don't know, they would hear about prototype, and they'd come to Willits, and they'd come in and they'd walk around the shop, and they're looking around, and they're going like, and I'd say, do you need some replacements? And they said yes, and we sell the little pokers, or we would sell the different things that they needed for under the counter. It was a toy shop, really, that's why. Anyway, moving up here was really miraculous because our friends, and I'll name drop because you may know some of these people and may not, Ari LaSalle, who is no longer with us, but Ari and her husband had decided they wanted to join a commune. And they had both taught in Santa Monica also. And I didn't know them real well, but I did know them. I knew Starla Warburton better, and I mentioned her by name because we were very, very good friends. But Ari and her husband started checking out communes, and they just started coming up, from Southern California. And they stopped at the New Dawn commune here in Willits, which is just south of town. And they really just loved it, but the commune was breaking up. They were just in the process of going their own ways. So they bought land with Steve Kovner out where we are, and that was the base. And it was kind of down, I see Lynn is here, and Lynn's right down there in that area also, right down near Sherwood Road. Well, Starla and Terry found land right away, and I'm going to show you. Here's where, you have to see it down. This is where Ari and Lauren LaSalle, he became Lauren, she became Ari. They were Marie and Les before they came. But Ari and Lauren lived here, and Starla and Terry bought on the top of Troll Ridge over here. Well, we told everybody, we'd come up to visit people, and we said, keep your eyes open for land for us. We'd really like to buy some land up here. And didn't hear anything. And one day, Bill is sitting in his office in Beverly Hills reading the Los Angeles Times, and he's going like, that sounds like it's right there in Mendocino County, kind of near where they are. And he called, and this was a house nobody knew about because this was the code house on the hill. And it wasn't because there were no, but it was built to code. And we had wanted to build when we came up here, but we also had just been in the process of remodeling for years, so we were very happy to have a chance to buy this house and to just move in without having to, do a lot of work. And it was located here. So the Warburtons were here, a mile down this way we are, and down here. So we made this triangle. Now, other people came at that time, and you may know some of these people too, because Gary Relland came, if you know Gary, and they made Gary, and then it was Jackie and Harvey, if you knew Jackie and Harvey, and who's the other one I'm forgetting? Anyway, we make a six-pointed star, is what we do. We actually, where our properties are, and they all came from Southern California. We are a six-pointed Southern California star on Troll Ridge. And I said the problem with being on Troll Ridge and Middle Earth was that people kept making these beautiful wooden signs and people kept coming and taking the wooden signs. So now we have regular signs and you can find us. But as of last Thursday, I am now living here in Willits. And as I said, across from the post office, and I'd be happy to get to know town people more. I'm really enjoying walking around town. I love walking the railroad tracks, and I keep meeting people. But I'm seeing more people now than I've seen in the last 4 years. I have felt fairly vulnerable. I do a lot of Zoom types of things with people, but it's not the same. It really isn't. And I know that the last few years have been incredibly hard. My husband has Lewy body dementia, and if you don't know Lewy body, it's not Alzheimer's, it's worse. Anyway, and these last few years have been very challenging. But before that, he built the most beautiful roads and paths all over our property, and they were all graded at a level out here so that I could walk them. Because when you live on a ridge top, everything's down, and you do have to be able to walk back up again. I exceeded my 5 minutes because I can go on.
It's really hard to interrupt because all these stories are so incredible, and I really want them to be heard. So, but we do have the time factor, so we're just going to move on from Troll Ridge. Thank you so much. Right through Lakeville and up the hill, Bell Springs Road, and we're going to have Mark O'Neill to tell us about where he came from, when he got here, and some things about that.
First of all, I'm stoked that so many people are here. I really wasn't expecting it, and thank you for coming. And I'd like to share my story because Casey is certainly carrying on the legacy, but I'll start by saying that my mother came from St. Louis to Southern California, to Wilmar around El Monte, and my father came from Detroit, but he came after the war. So he came out and he saw what California was all about, and so immediately he came out. They got married. I have 8 siblings. We were a very close family growing up. And when we first moved to our spot on Fellowship in La Puente, the nearest big grocery store was 20 miles away. Yeah, little mom and pop places, but it was very, very rural. By the time the folks moved up to Bell Springs in 1977, there was a major supermarket within, in a 3-mile radius, there were 6 of them. So, you know, suburbia overcame us. My father always felt encroached upon. He wanted to get out of suburbia, and he talked about going up north. And when we were kids, it was like, great, this sounds fine. And then when my oldest brothers kind of moved out and my sister and I were there, I was a senior in high school, she was a junior, he got serious. He really wanted to go. And we looked at each other and said, see you later, Pop. We're not going anywhere. And of course that was bogus, because if he had decided to go, we would have had to, but he saw what way the wind was blowing and he said, okay, forget it. And then after I got out of high school, I got drafted, the only one of the 7 of us boys to get drafted. And it was when I was overseas that this whole idea of the community up north came into being. My brother Noel, at one point when I was in Korea, sent me a letter in which he wrote in it, and he said, I do hope you and the Nancy, that was my first wife, are still planning on joining us at our community family up north. I hope to move up there September of '73, and we're going to go to San Francisco, rent a home, and get our bearings, and then we're going to find property and move up north. And that was a family goal of ours. And indeed, when I did get out of the military, it was a little later, it was in '74, but we moved up to San Jose, and there were 2 of my siblings and their spouses in a home on War Admiral in San Jose. We were all going to school, and we were looking for property. And so we went up in Marin, we looked up on Brook Trails. It was a fabulous 20-acre parcel, straight down and straight up. And we said to the dude, how are we supposed to build a home on this? He said, oh, there's some really good technology for pole homes. And what he thought we were looking for is a place to grow cannabis. And it's like, we had no idea there was cannabis. That wasn't what we were about. We wanted to go up and do this. So then this property on Bell Springs opened up for a 100,000 acre ranch, and for $400 an acre, we could get 20-acre parcels. Well, it's 1975. I bought one with my wife, my first wife. My parents bought one. My brother Noel bought a parcel with my brother Matt, and all together we had 5 20-acre parcels. And the first ones to move up were my parents in 1977. And so my father built this huge, well, he built a small barn and then he built a huge a cinder block, like a Swiss chalet. And in 1978, two of my brothers moved up, and in 1980, another one did. So by the time I came up in the summer of 1981, on my 20 acres and put up a 16 by 20 cabin, there were already a whole bunch of family members. So in that respect, I had it made. And Annie and I moved up in May of 1982 permanently with Casey 5 months along the way. He was born in September. We did move into the 16 by 20 windowless, no water, no power, no shelving, no running water, no anything. And we moved in June, and the first day that we woke up there after having unloaded the Volkswagen bus with all of our stuff, Annie this little dark window covered up, and she just said, "What did I get myself into?" It was cold. It wasn't supposed to be cold. This was June. It was California. One of my brothers, Matt, came wandering up and said, "How you guys doing?" That good, huh? So we went and we got a Tin Lizzie little stove. We went across the way to neighbor Rex's, got the piping, and in a couple of hours we had heat. We'd already built in the whole fireplace and everything like that. So we had heat, and then we just made a long list and we started doing things like that. That's how we ended up in Mendocino County.
Yeah. All right. What's up, y'all? Growing up here was, this place is great. Like and there's so many reflections of it today. Like we're standing here getting ready to do the panel, and Rosalie comes up. And Rosalie was the midwife who helped birth me and both of my brothers. And so, those connections of small town living are like, they're so treasured, they're so dear. And you, like living here, you have the time to reflect on, and that's something that I've always felt really good about. Growing up here, time was a lot slower then. And, like Chia said, you kind of just scamper around, like, Ma says, here's your picnic lunch, don't come back unless somebody's bleeding. And so you just out around and stuff, and sometimes somebody is bleeding, but otherwise. And so it was good, and there's just so much like, family lore that comes down through the time, and like seeing now like my brother and his little guy, and starting to pass that on to him. And the reality of growing up here, of living in the hills, and being on the land is something that for me is just such a potent thing. And there's trial and tribulation with it. It's like, especially in the early days, we all know there was the whole camp scene, and like, either you got busted or your neighbor got busted. It was always just kind of the cycle of things. And that was like the negative to it, but the like the bright shining light of it was how much it drew people together. And so it was like, you have the benefit because Bob got busted and we got to raise up some lawyer fees, or we got busted and the community threw a benefit. And that's actually like one of my earliest memories is like being at the benefit for raising up some lawyer fees. And so there was this deep sense of togetherness that I think we're still like we're holding on to, but it's it's different now. It's like the world just moves faster now. Then it was like I remember asking the folks like, "What did you guys used to do?" And they're like, "What do you mean?" I'm like, "Well, like for fun and stuff. We didn't have TV, you don't have VCR." Like, well, we took a lot of walks. and that's what we did as kids too. You wander around like, you carting home a backpack full of bay nuts or acorns or buckeyes or whatever. This is all the stuff we scavenged up. And I was like, bring all that home. And so it was just this, it was this, feral is a good choice of word. We were just out romping and stomping, and it was a time of, I think simplicity. And that sense of like the community, like going away to the little mountain school up there, and so we all went, there was like the little kids. I was a little kid at the time, so the little kids were in the one room, and then like the medium kids and the bigger kids in the other room. It was all, I think it was like what, preschool, kindergarten, and then like first and second, like third, fourth, and fifth or something. Because it's like Chia said, there was like a whole bunch of people came. They all had kids, so all the kids were in a pretty similar cohort. And there was a few older kids and stuff, but for the most part, it was like we were all fairly similar age, and so you had this shared set of experiences that was, that was special to us, and to look back on it and like to reconnect with those kids as grown-ups. And a lot of those kids are still around here, and you see each other, and you have that. And a lot of times we don't even talk about it, but you just have that sense of like, yep, we're from here. This is where we are, and to see that kind of generational things, like I've grown up and like all my friends have kids, and you start to like see all the little people, and you think like, oh, this is where the folks were when they got here, and they had all the little rompers running around, and now we're like, okay, it's that cycle continues. So it's it's something that I really treasure. I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Well, it seems like we're in a cycle of stories. There's the continuity here about these people who are they're a neighborhood, right? They're up somewhere, but they've created this really tight community of some kind. I've heard it 3 ways now. And is there anything else you want to say about that? Did it evolve over time and people got more isolated, or did it continue? Do you feel that what we don't know here, I live in town, but we don't know, as people live in town, that there is still these amazing neighborhoods up on top? You want to tell us, anybody want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, I know that when we came up here and there wasn't power, that early on we started doing the Dances of Universal Peace, and Maggie was one of the people who led them, and it was a coming together on Sundays where we kind of honored all of the different traditions, and I think that it was very special to those of us who participated in it for many years. But in addition to that, I want to mention that when my kids came, because you were all talking about the effect, and my boys were 16 and 17 when we came, and my daughter was about 10. And I realized that I've only known this since I talked to them recently about the fact that I was going to do this, that they told me things that if I'd known at the time, I think I would have felt very bad about some of them. But when we moved up here, we moved up here with these U-Hauls, and I did not know that my sons, I didn't know they were growing when we were down in Sherman Oaks. There was a big area between our house and the other house next door to us, and these people had all of these things that they had sort of discarded between our buildings, and my kids planted in all of them. They had the burrow with the little side baskets, and they had different kinds of the bird bath, and my kids had planted and all of a sudden, and they moved them up here. And it wasn't until, they're unloading the U-Haul that, I thought, gosh, bringing, marijuana to Mendocino County is really something. But back then, we did not know the word seedsamia, without seeds. I mean, of course it was seeded and all that kind of stuff. But my daughter, and this is the one that makes me sad to tell it, because she was 10 and she went to the Waldorf School, which I think was a wonderful experience for her. I have no regrets. I think that she felt like that. She got a wonderful founding in the arts, and she ended up being a sculptor and an artist, so it worked out really well for her that way. But she said that she used to just live in fear because camp used our ridge for sighting, and they would fly down our ridge in order to go off and take off on things. And she was so afraid that they were going to bust us and that she'd be put in protective custody. And I really did not know that she was living with that kind of fear, and I feel badly about that. But nonetheless, I think that it worked out well for her and for my boys. My older son is the only licensed CBD grower in Merced County. And if anybody needs any product, and my other son, I shouldn't even say it, he took the high school proficiency, he never went to college, but he did pass the bar. And he's a lawyer, but he worked in the DA's office down in Santa Rosa, and he was getting so many people off that he just did not feel right about it, feel good about it. So he does not practice law, and he is a major grower over in.
Somewhere we don't really want to go.
Well, he had a huge underground operation. And any of you who ever planted, anybody who ever grew mushrooms, he did illegal. As I said, he did legal mycelium. He actually, the mycelium, producing mycelium is okay, but planting the mushrooms and growing it, even though he advised many people in Laytonville and other places in terms of growing mushrooms, he had a big box that was a glove box that you would, work in terms of making the mycelium and putting it in jars and so on that he would sell, because you could sell that legally. Anyway, I can still remember he had a thing in there for sterilizing things, heat source, like a candle kind of thing. And one day, I guess the gases had built up, and all of the gloves, and there were 4 sets of gloves on the box kind of thing, all of them were going, ooh, ooh, they turned inside out. Anyway, so we went through that. That's enough for right now.
I would address the community part because I spoke of our family community, but it was a huge difference in terms of what was out in Barrel Springs. And we played ball starting in 1982, that same summer that we first moved up. Neighbor Rex had a open field. We converted it into a ball field, and so we played softball. Kids, everybody played, and it was a unifying part of the whole, living up there. We went to Alan Marguerite's solstice party, summer solstice party, only 3 weeks after we moved up, and the whole community was there. And so when my father and I got busted for 33 plants in 1985, that number 33, that was my lottery number in the draft also, so not a good number. The government left a notice after destroying everything about our place that they had seized the property and that it was now the property of the government. And so Annie and I and our 3 sons, well, 2 sons and 1 on the way, were essentially looking for a different place unless we got a good lawyer, which we did, Ron Sinaway, and he rest in peace. But I mean, hey, you pay to play. And the community turned out. Casey talked about the benefit. And because people figured if it can happen to Mark and Annie, it can happen to any of us. And so they turned out. The lawyers' fees were astronomical for the time, maybe $17,500 or something like that. But the community came up with at least a third of it, and then Michael Ferretto, for whom I was working, lent me the rest, and we worked together, and it was paid off pretty quickly. And the reason I bring it up is because I felt just an immense debt of gratitude towards the community. And we had the school going up on the mountain. It was overseen, and we had a liaison with the school district so that we got ADA so that we could get materials and things, but the teacher didn't take any money. And at one point, General Loister, who was doing the teaching, the liaison, was uncomfortable with the situation that was going on with a particular child and parent, and so she wanted to withdraw. So they needed another volunteer to go get a teaching credential to keep the little school alive. I already had a degree, so I went down to Ukiah, to Dominican College. Yeah, but no, right in the south end of Ukiah, Talmadge, out there. And it was just a satellite college, but I got my degree over the course of the next year. And then when the little school eventually did, through political reasons, fall apart, I came down to Laytonville and got a position in the middle school and taught for 16 years. And we were talking before, Annie and I, about the second year that I taught, Casey was in a production of Romeo and Juliet along with Annie's daughter Laurel, who played Romeo, and she was the best person who went for the job. And so for every year that I taught down there, we had a full-length Shakespeare production in the original language. We alternated between Romeo and Juliet, Twelfth Night, Much Ado About Nothing, and in the fourth year we did A Christmas Carol, which was also, we had two different girls perform Eleanor Scrooge, because they, again, were the best. We converted the classroom into a theater in the round. We had kids working the lights, and we had more than 200 costumes, mostly Annie put together, my wife Annie, and we were getting, so we had a culture that was indeed had to do with originally the community. The hog farm was instrumental in the early productions for costumes and things like that, and support. And so, again, the community supporting me allowed me to return. I would still be teaching today. I retired in 2005, and I only did it because I would not teach to the standardized tests. They wanted us to go and have staff meetings in which we didn't talk about students, we talked about how to teach to a test. And so I wouldn't do the meetings, and I wouldn't teach to the test. I hated to leave. I spent 10 years teaming with another teacher in which we took 6th, 7th, and 8th graders in the same classroom, and we did a hands-on, project-based, literature-based program in which we got the kids out as much as we could. We took a week-long trip to Yosemite each year, and again, a small rural school is an incredible place to work.
I almost feel like this is a confessional. Since we're in this room with all this incredible paraphernalia and history of the cannabis industry, I didn't come up to Ukiah to grow weed. I came up because I had been teaching in Germany. I wasn't expatriate. I wasn't planning on giving up my citizenship or anything, but the Vietnam thing was starting to dwindle down a little bit. And I just decided that I wanted to get out of the city. All of us, many of us, probably went through the same thing. We were tired of the bureaucracy. Well, talking about a confessional, I went through 50 years of paranoia. Many of you went through the same thing. 50 years of bureaucracy coming into our land, arresting our friends. The thing was just out of hand. And now, since it got legalized, all those bureaucrats jumped in, bought land, started growing weed in Canada, all over the U.S., then the prices went boom to the bottom. I think many of those entrepreneurs of the class that came out of the bureaucracy lost their shorts.
Yay.
They did not deserve to win, and many of them did not. They invested huge amounts of money to start farms and that sort of thing. Well, confessional, Greenfield Ranchers didn't come up here to grow wheat, but by golly, that was the best way to do it. So we started growing. I had 10 plants, and maybe I got 3 pounds. At that time, I got $4,800 a pound. You talk about, so I started increasing it, of course. Right? Well, years later, after they finally legalized it, the Many of the people on the ranch put in their applications. Many of them some of them got okayed. My daughter went through a lot of bureaucracy to get her stuff done. They made everybody bring their house up to code. We were Class K. It was nowhere near code. It was a far distant from code. But like she and her husband, they had to spend a lot of money just to get legal with their own houses, but they had to bring them up to code. Their fencing, their outbuildings, their everything. It's just totally ridiculous. And I think it's still kind of ridiculous because many people have been cheated out of the opportunity to get a permit. How many people went in and applied for permits, and some of them are still trying. Some of them have succeeded, but the underground, the black market, is going strong in our county, and we know it. A lot of people didn't sign up because they couldn't, so they just did it anyway. And I think we'll continue that now that it's legal. More and more are slowly plugging into it. So some people retired, got out of it. They couldn't take the paranoia. And so we've got lots of people on the ranch, for instance. We've got lawyers, we've got doctors. We've got teachers. We've got people who are carpenters and go back and forth to town and do their normal stuff. But on the side, they got that little bit of weed growing, right? And so that little cushion became just the only way to survive was to grow a little bit of weed. It wasn't hurting anybody, but the authorities, of course, took advantage of all this legal stuff and put a whole bunch of people all over this country into jail for a single roach in their ashtray of their car. Some people got 10 years in jail. There's people in jail right now, after it's been legalized, that are still serving prison time, and some of them they've decided, okay, we'll let you go now, but if they could keep you, they would. And I think it's slowly changing. Of course, you guys are all familiar with the legalities that we've all dealt with over the years, but it's been a heck of a trip. And I had a heart attack about 3 years ago. Maybe 5 years. I lose track of time. I'm 84 years old. Next month I'll be 85. And so I feel blessed to have made it this far. But my son took over, came up to live with me, and started building a house. And I had a heart attack, so I couldn't even, 20 minutes of exercise and I'm gone. I'm wasted. So he took over, and he has built a mansion. He has built a house that I am so proud of. Incredible. He's the kind of guy who studies everything before he starts putting it together, right? He didn't nail a house together. He screwed a house together. We could take our house apart and move it, parts of it if we wanted to, but he did not use nails. He did these joints of huge timbers, like the Japanese things he did. He did some of those in the house. I walk into my house now, and it just doesn't feel real because I lived in a shack for so many years. The shack has turned into a storage bin. And it's slowly creeping toward going downward. And one of these days it'll fall over, and we'll take it apart and use the wood for fire, whatever. But it's been a great adventure. Thanks for listening.
Mansion builder in the room, please.
Toby.
Toby, come stand up and just take a bow. So, we'd like to do question and answers. We're gonna avoid the regulation and licensing question because that's a deep rabbit hole, as we all know, but let's talk about other things. The education part I find very interesting, that all these three families were educated, interested people with a toy store to help kids have fun. Little puppets, I have little puppets still. So anybody have a question? Stand up and deliver your question.
Good afternoon. So this has to do with education. So the struggle that you all went through, living as such, and yet you're all very well educated. So I know the answer to this question, but in my conversation with Casey, from what I understand,
Casey, you'd
with
like
Casey
Casey
O'Neill.
to answer this question? What's the question?
The question is, well, I know that you weren't home educated, and living where you live in such a rural area, muddy, snow, downpours of rain, the distance, how many times did you and your siblings miss school?
This guy. Oh man, Pops is a rain or shine, snow or sleet kind of guy. So 5:30 in the morning, you gotta walk up the road and put the chains on the car, and the snow is deep, and we're like, Pop, can we just stay home and sled? He's like, nope, I don't miss school. So, yeah, there was not any missing of school. And you know, Pops never said, you better go to college. He always said, man, I had the best time of my life in college. So he set a very strong example for us, and it was one that I'm pleased to follow on.
Beth Bosk has a question.
I know he was a writer, publishing a case. It's like Thoreau. It's really people. It's like reading Thoreau. And so I'd like you to talk about that aspect of your life.
Can I just repeat that question for everyone back here? So she's asked about Casey's writing abilities and how he, or whatever, you want to just talk about the writing part of your life, Casey.
Well, same as the last question, you know, apples and trees, chips and blocks. Pops is you know, very literarily inclined. I don't know if that's a word, but you know, like writing runs in the family. My grandma wrote books, Matt wrote books. Pops was very prolific as a writer. Pops was an English teacher, so he definitely instilled in me a love of the English language and also like a desire to pursue it. So writing, you know, anything that'll get you out of your head and into a flow is therapy. So for me, that's what writing has very much become. You know, I did a lot of creative writing as a kid, even in, you know, high school and through college and stuff. And so now it's definitely one of those things where there's, you know, I'll sit down knowing I'm going to write, but not necessarily sure what I'm going to write about. And it's a way of just kind of accessing that deeper sense of self and kind of seeking direction and answers.
I wanted to ask Chia how she's feeling about the future of Greenfield with your sons and that next generation coming up. And you know, if you want to work cannabis in there too, I'd be interested about that.
Sure. Well, it's an interesting question, Katrina. You know, when I was pregnant with my older son, we found the land that we live on now, which is neighboring property to my father-in-law, which I didn't really touch on in the beginning, actually. So my husband is a second generation Greenfielder, and so am I. And so we met through that. Actually, he's a little bit older than me, and he was friends with my brother when I was, you know, when I was really little. I was sort of like the annoying little kid that followed him around. But so, you know, so we kind of connected when we were older. And so then when I became pregnant with my older son, we were living actually at my dad's house, and he wasn't living there at the time. And we found the piece of property that's connected to my father-in-law's piece of property, which is on really, you know, more towards Redwood Valley. And so there's something on Greenfield called the right of first refusal. So when a piece of property comes up for sale, that person needs to let their neighbors know first. And so that's how we got the land that we live on now, which was pretty much blank piece of land. And we started homesteading, and so it kind of gets you, you know, I realized like what it's like to start from scratch. And we had this really, really basic shell of a house when we bought that land. And just to give some context on that too, we bought 40 acres for $85,000 in like 2000. And so, you know, because the nature of the tenants in common situation, banks won't loan on that, things like that. So you could get land for fairly cheap. And so anyway, so we started literally from scratch and started building our homestead. There was no water, no power, no driveway, there was nothing else. And so, you know, made me realize like how much work goes into creating infrastructure and building ponds and building driveways and doing all these things, right? And so just gave me an appreciation for how much our, you know, our parents did and how much road work there was and all these things, right? And so I grew up with a really deep sense of community, and I continue that mission in my life still. And I'm always trying to build community, help my neighbors and get the stories out there and like promote the history and all that too. So this is right up my alley, but you know, it really gives me like a really huge sense of gratitude for where I came from, and I want to instill that into my children. And I think, you know, their lifestyle is a little bit different than when I was a kid. You know, the community aspect when I was a kid is all the adults kind of took care of all the children, everybody ran around and knew each other. And these days, you know, people have a little bit of different lifestyle. They go to town, they go to their jobs, and the community aspect isn't as tight as it used to be. But I think they do have that sense of home, and like this is our home. And you know, I've never lived anywhere else. I tried living in Willits for like 6 months in Brook Trails, and it was hell. And then we moved back up to the ranch. We tried to actually remodel our house, was the reason why we moved out of it in the first place. But you know, it's impossible for me to leave, I feel like. It's like I'm so tied to the community in so many different ways. And you know, I hope my children feel that way, and I hope that they stick around and, you know, they have ambitions to go out in the world, and we'll see what happens. But, you know, it's a interesting time, and I honestly kind of want to like keep that rope really close because I don't know, I don't trust the world right now. So for me, it's a little scary to let them go out into the, you know. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question exactly, but you know, for me, community is like where it's at, and so I hope that I instilled that, you know, into them. Yeah.
This kind of goes across the panel. I was born and raised Northern California, grew up between Lake and Yuba mostly. 6 years ago I moved up here, but one of the things I see is this next generation is what are we doing for our children? What are we instilling here? We've spent so long being underground and it being ignored as though the flow of these communities haven't been here, as though tourism didn't have anything to do with cannabis, as the fishing had nothing to do with cannabis, as these things had nothing to do with them. Yet we sit here amongst educators, and you know, for our next generation, one of the big things that got me with the Roots Elders Council, with Pebbles and RJ and Annie and all them, was that idea of coming back and saying, let's go back to some of that community. Let's go back to some of that community building where we're helping each other, and what are we doing to retain our kids? Even if they leave away, what are they going to come back and bring us?
Thanks for your question.
And so my question is, you know, as this young generation, this next generation coming up with our older generation, to be able to come to you, you know, I think the question I'm asking is, how can we approach you, and how can we together in this next generation work together to make this a place that actually becomes that destination, coming back to the principles you outlaid? Because the principles you outlaid, whether it be living soil and the regenerative farming and the back to land movement, is something that we're starting to see again where the world needs it, and so it should really drive.
We'll answer the question.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody got an answer about how they see the future working, the values that were brought here by we'll call them the OG, we'll call ourselves the OG. Who's OG in this room that came up here from somewhere else? Anybody else a long time ago? Well, anyway, yeah, somebody did it. Okay, so there was a way to live on the land, right, and on the earth, and how you mentioned sustainability, and you've all talked about doing things from scratch. How do you see that carrying forward? I believe is the question you just heard.
You know, I think for a lot of people, you know, my age, I think cannabis is a portal back to agriculture, back to the land. And you know, I think it's interesting because for the elders, like, you know, both Don and Pops mentioned, like, they didn't come here because they were coming to grow weed, and it wasn't the green rush, and it wasn't this whole da 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 da. And so, you know, I think that there's a health and vitality that comes from connection with the land, and I think that there's a, you know, as elders, as humans, as people who are fostering an oncoming generation, there's a need to be able to set an example and to demonstrate leadership. And I think that that's what the first generation of the Back to the Landers really did. And they, you know, and you see, you know, for me, like going off to college, like I used to be a farmer. And so, you know, you have to, like, you come into that growth as a human, as an adult, and you start to think about what are the things that I value in life. And you look at the example that was laid down by the elders, you know, and it's that one of the things I've really taken to treasure is taking the time to thank my elders, because in a society that doesn't tend to value elderhood, I think it's something that's incredibly important. And so first of all, you know, thank you to the elders, and kind of further to, you know, to answer your question, Jake, it's like, you know, offer the teachings, take the time to you know, for me it's to take the time to write about, like, this is exactly what I'm doing on the farm this week, so that anybody who wants to know can, like, this is what's happening.
And what are you doing on the high school? What were you doing last year?
I was helping to foster the high school garden, you know, and I really hope to continue to be more involved, and I've found, you know, the changes in the farm and stuff that I haven't had as much time as I'd like to offer, but to be able to, like, help build a platform for young people to learn how to farm, how to grow things, and to experience that set of cycles, because, you know, we kind of ended up, you know, the origins of it was this holistic perspective, and it kind of became this trend towards a monocrop reality, which I don't think is very healthy. And so I think it's very important to focus on the broader aspects of growing and tending and harvesting and loving.
And bring it down into the school system. Down in Laytonville Middle School, we always had the corner in which there were a series of boxes, just grow boxes. We had an annual competition from the homes, garlic growing. We planted it in September and we harvested in June and had a big garlic festival. The high school band would come over and play for us. My wife Annie was on campus in that little section, and she could see out there, and so if I sent students from my classroom over to tend our box, I knew that I had some help over there. So well, we did pretty well in that competition with the garlic anyway, but that's another way to bring all the kids who were into it. It was a way of reverse. We had all the special needs kids over there. We had mainstreamed over there. We brought mainstreamed into this area so that all the kids were included in the curriculum, and we used gardening as a large part of it.
And they grew their own food.
And did the elders program that Annie and her classes did every once a month they did an elder lunch in which they converted the classroom into a restaurant, and the kids did the cooking and they served the elders on this particular, and I think almost certain Beth Hogan still has an elders lunch / meal monthly and this has been a long established tradition at the middle school.
I want to call attention to the size of this garlic bulb here. So one thing I admire about the O'Neill family, and it really struck me the first time I met Casey at the Laytonville Range, was he talked about food and cannabis being one. That cannabis to normalize into our herbal pharmacopoeia and for food to be grown in cannabis, which is really hard now because of all the regulations, but you found a way around it, and I'm sure you're growing all your own food, all of you. So let's talk about food and how cannabis is part of our lifestyle. It's not a big overview cash crop thing, which it is. Let's face it, almost every indigenous culture had cash crops that allowed them to relate to the urban lifestyles around them. But do you have anything to say about food and cannabis and how to make these beautiful vegetables that we all admire?
I want to speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, since the early days of ending up kind of as a public spokesman in the cannabis space, I've always felt that food is the lifeblood, and it's, you put the energy into growing the food, you get the energy from the food, you put that into growing the herb, you send this thing out into the world that's going to change how people's day is going. So it's, everything connects to everything, right? And I think that with food production, for me, it's like, it's been the anchor point. Like, we would not, like, we're still fighting our way through the whole regulatory process, and we would not have made it this far without food. And especially last year with the market crash, like, the vegetable business was the thing that kept, A, it kept food on the table, but B, it kept, enough liquidity coming in. And I mean, there was a point last year where I was kind of, well, seems like the weekend's over, but we're doing $1,500, a couple grand a week in veggies, so that's what I'm gonna do. And then it got to fall, and the wild pigs came through and wiped out my whole fall crop lineup, and I was kind of like, oh shit. Sorry. I think that one of the things that you learn about being on the land and homesteading is like, man, you get knocked down. Like, farming's gonna knock you down as much. It's gonna knock you down and stomp on you. If you don't have the fortitude to get back up, maybe it's not the right career choice. And there's been times when I think to myself, like, man, what am I doing here? Like, especially with all the regulatory stuff. But like I said, the food, tending plants, like working with the land, that's the anchor point. That's the thing that brings it home.
And we have this little farm stand up there on
Farm
Bill
stand.
5 miles up. The community gives us incredible support for that farm stand. Whether it's the oatmeal, gluten-free chocolate chip cookies they're after, I don't know.
Market like 50 bags of cookies a week.
So, yeah.
You can pay with Venmo.
But the community gives us huge support.
I have a question for Emmy Good, because we just talked about bringing cash into the homestead, which has been a thing that's been needed, it seems, always. And Emmy created a manufacturing facility. And would you tell us a little bit about that, Emmy, that related to your shop? And
Well,
how you
it was 5 years that we were off the grid, and as soon as we got power, somebody out on Sherwood Road below us, our neighbor, said, we got power, and if you want a chance at it, if you'll bring it underground, you can come through our land. So we brought power underground up to our ridge. So nobody else up there, actually, they eventually brought lines in, which they never should have done, but nonetheless, we had power. And during that 5 years, because we didn't have phones, we didn't have power and all that, I'd gotten into writing a lot of letters, and I got involved in a mail art project where we would decorate our envelopes and we would send them and so on. And it was part of a whole kind of a Dada thing out of San Francisco. Anyway, I got a letter one day and it had some rubber stamps on it, and I thought, oh. And I knew that I had a bunch of old rubber stamps that I'd had from when I also going to preschool. And I had these rubber stamps, so I got them out and I started stamping on letters that I would send out. And then something happened where we had to do some family business where we were flying all over the United States, and we had a ticket we could fly anywhere as long as we came back through Atlanta. And I decided that I would research rubber stamps while I was out there. And anytime we flew into Florida or Colorado or these places where we were trying to follow what was happening in the family's business, I would collect rubber stamps. And so when we came back, Bill, my husband, gave me a vulcanizer for Christmas. And he had a very high-end printing business down in Beverly Hills, and the vulcanizer is about as low as you could go. It's like you print stuff with it. Anyway, but it meant that he was very familiar with the process of having plates made and making molds, being able to cast rubber and all that. So it just started off with some of my own very simple, not very talented artwork, but there are so many artists in Mendocino County that I ended up working with over 20 different artists here in Mendocino County who made designs for us for rubber stamps. A few of them had royalties, sometimes we just bought the artwork outright from them. But we started on our hilltop and we hired our neighbors. And it's amazing how many teachers we had working for us. And I fixed lunch for people, Monday through Thursday. We would manufacture, we had converted, by that time we'd moved out of our house. We built a little hand-built house down the hill our son had, where he had gone out and he built a little thing, a little model out of sticks, basically. And then he went out and he cut down a tree for each one of those sticks and he labeled those, he labeled things. He took the bark off the trees and he built the framework, built the house. And so we moved down to the little house, just this little house, because he was off to college. And the house up above there became the factory. And every room was something. And we had a big well tower. We had it on the one side of the well tower. We had it on the other side of the well tower. We had a huge garden. When I came up, John Devins had introduced me, so we had a backhoe come in and we had double dug all of our beds and we run all over the county bringing in fish compost and compost, all that kind of stuff. We did that. That was part of what we were doing. And I fixed lunches for people from the food that we, would grow. So those were really fun years. And there was not almost even a reason to come down the hill. But we were doing all of these crafts fairs. We would take our rubber stamps on the weekend and we'd go and set up for a craft fair. And we come back and make stamps all week long, and then we go off and do the fair. And we got our production up to the point where we started advertising. We advertised with Beth, even in New Suffolk. We advertised in a Rubber Stamp Madness, was a big newspaper that went all over everywhere. And we kept having people who would come to Mendocino County and then they'd want to find us, but they'd get lost out in the hills. And so we thought, well, maybe if we just had a little place in town where people could go. And at that point, I can't remember what it's called now, it's the little one that's right next door now to the stamp, where the stamp shop was. Anyway, it was for rent, we went in there, and we said, no, it just wouldn't work. It kind of smelled like mildew, so this wouldn't do it. But as we came out, there was a guy in the window, and he was putting up a for sale sign. And we knocked on the thing and said, would you be willing to rent this place? He said, nope. This was Tim's Shoe Repair, anybody who goes back that far. Anyway, so we said, okay, we'll take it. And we walked that day, we walked right down to the place, Redwood, or whatever it was, still there. We walked in there and we said we wanted to buy the place. And they said, well, okay, we'll do all the paperwork, but you got to come back tomorrow because he's got beer on his bad breath. And we don't want you to be taking advantage of it. So we did get the shop, and it was really too big to just have rubber stamps there. So that's when we just would get whatever somebody requested. It didn't matter what it was, and so we had a big art section because of that. And in the meantime, we had started another business because people, once they had the rubber stamps, they had to have things to stamp on. And so we, because being in the printing business, we're very familiar with paper. And so we started California Paper Goods also. So we not only ship rubber stamps literally all over the world, but we also converted paper. We made it up. We brought with us from Beverly Hills that we were using a press. Nothing was electrical. I mean, everything was by hand, or we had a foot treadle kind of thing that was worked, or we had the big Ka-chunk paper cutters, and we were scoring with this machine, as I said, that was a foot treadle kind of thing, in order to score all the greeting cards and different sizes that we made. Anyway, we eventually had 30 people on the payroll, and nobody was full-time. Everybody worked part-time because they were up here and they didn't want to work full-time. Anyway, I've taken my time. What you asked
Chris?
Hi, there's been a lot of talk about the homesteading over the years and education, and all of them that's been here for a while wants to know we had events where we featured such education, not unlike the model building of little houses and John Jevons's gardening. So my request and or attention to be the future of what you have here is a lot of very unique knowledge that was once shared in the 90s here where we had the solar energy expos and not unlike the real goods events. So, and that's all gone now if we haven't realized that when we need it the most. So
Your question is?
my question is there any, did anybody thoughts about events, any one of you working with? I mean, I think there's still the not so simple living fair that,
No.
it's not, no longer.
Maybe,
But the question is about,
to festivals and events and things that might come out from this culture that we're keeping going. Okay, someone in the audience, take that up.
I'll always fire. I think one of the lessons I've learned is that events are hard. And
Yes.
big up to Black Oak Ranch, big up to the people who continue to carry the torch for events, because event production is I'm terrible about that right now. So I think as we've seen kind of this evolution in communications, social media is really as much as it's a double-edged sword, it's an incredible platform for learning. The give and take that happens on Instagram, on Facebook is I learned so much about farming, about what the new tools are that are coming out, about what's available. And it's once you plug into any one of these farm pages, there's chatter and commentary from all the other farm pages, and you start seeing who's that? What are they doing? What are they doing? And there's such a mycelial mat of communication that there's, I think the difference between now and time past is that everybody's got a little device in their pocket that has all of human knowledge on it. And so I think that the knowledge is accessible and it's there, and it requires some give and take.
He's talking about this. And in a display case at the far back of the room, we have a black object we didn't label properly. Did anyone notice that black box in the back of the room? It's not labeled well in the display case. Well, it's not this, but it's a CB radio.
Yeah.
And the two of you talk about CB radios. Was there that going on at the ranch? Or
There
up
still
on
is, yeah.
Yeah.
We started with doing CBs. Several people had them, so we kind of connected on the ranch, and some people had their call name, and we had a lot of night eagles and white eagles and
What was yours?
Huh?
What was yours?
Spread eagle. So anyway, the CB thing. I was a school teacher before, and I thought I'd plug in to the school system in Ukiah as a substitute, okay? But I had no phone, and I had no, there was no communication for the school to be able to contact me. So one person on the ranch had a phone, and they would call him, then he would get on the CB and call me, and then I would be late for school. But it didn't last very long because it was just ridiculous, I didn't like the idea of waking my neighbor up at 6 a.m. to get me up. It was ridiculous. So I was glad that I had turned 65 and had plugged into retirement and Social Security. That's what I live on now. I get my Social Security and my little bit of retirement money, and my son does my cooking for me, He's been,
We didn't talk about your crafting. I mean, that's the thing is like we were talking about income sources.
oh yeah,
right?
the income sources for several years. We plugged into a couple of things. One of them was a little cooperative that started from a guy called Crooked Stitch, Christopher Crooked Stitch. Now, well, some of you'll see the.
Well, this is not.
Well, this
not
is not one of
his.
them, but it's kind of
Similar.
I think there were 13 women and myself. They were making these shirts that looked like Indian wear with fringes hanging off and beads, and I got into batiking. So I was batiking the cloth, and then they would make the shirts, and so there's several people have them on the ranch, still wear the shirts, But the income part of it, when Christopher, he passed away from AIDS, and so the co-op fell apart, and each of us took some of the cloth and some of the materials and some of the finished pieces, but we were doing well, I don't know what you call it. Well, the rounds of craft shows all over the state, and somebody would take shirts and the product and do one fair while somebody else was doing another one, and so that lasted maybe 4 years, 5 years, and then that fell apart, and many of the neighbors people just started being desperate in a way because they didn't want to do the weed and get all that paranoia and raising their kids, and so people started taking on legal jobs. People. I know a couple of people on the ranch that are teachers, and they go every day, and it's not easy. The ranch it's a long drive, and if you live in the middle of the ranch, you're talking about 3 miles before you even get off the ranch. So that was quite a challenge, and now my finances are just retirement. I don't have to grow anything to make a living anymore. I grow my little patch, 6 plants for. Take a chance on. They're not going to mess with me, I don't think any of us have to worry about the little guy so much anymore as we used to. They used to pick on people if they just saw one plant, of course, they were going to come in, and we got raided on the ranch.
1982.
1982,
I think.
82, I think it was, and a big trail of trucks and cars, and the DEA and the airplanes are flying around, and it was a madhouse. It was on TV. I'm going to tell this one, but a helicopter hovered over my house, and I could see the guy hanging out with a camera, and then I gave him the finger, and then I pulled my pants down and shined him, But my dad saw me on TV in San Diego. He said, I didn't really recognize you. Anyway, my folks came up and visited a few times, and my mom was so conservative. She was a little Christian lady, and the ranch was pretty wild for her, right? We had a party, and it was a birthday party, I think, for Fred
Mervine.
Fred Mervine, our president of the board, and Sequoia, a longtime resident of the ranch, was a character, and she popped out of a cake at the birthday party, right? My mother's sitting next to Fred, and Sequoia backs out of the cake with "Happy Birthday" printed across her rear end. So the party started, and they're dancing, and one of the ladies glommed onto my dad. And my mother went up and she chewed the lady out. She told him, "This is my husband, keep your hands off of him." And she grabbed my dad by the ear and she dragged him out of the house. And she chewed him out outside, private thing, and people talked about it for years.
Was that the same? I think that was the same party that my grandma. Okay, so there was like a tray of pot brownies at the potluck,
Oh, yes.
and the sign said "adults brownies." So my grandmother thought, "Well, I'm an adult," and so she scraped the pan and ate the bottom of the brownie pan, and she
And-
fripped.
At 3 in the morning,
Oh, gosh.
they're knocking on my door. Go, we got to go to the doctor. Mama's having a heart attack or something. So they're screaming and yelling. Okay, so we jump in the Volkswagen bus and we head for town. And we're going down the road and a rabbit is hopping down the road in front of us. And we couldn't go 2 miles an hour, We didn't want to run over the rabbit. But my dad starts yelling, "Run over the son of a bitch, we got to go to the hospital." So we take her to the hospital and the doctor says, "What's wrong, what's wrong?" She said, "Well, I said she ate a bunch of brownies, that were loaded with weed." And so he was kind of critical of letting her do it, I said, "Well, she did it on her own. We told her that this stuff was spiked, and she just said, 'Oh, this doesn't taste bad at all,' So she ate up this brownie. She was in the hospital for 3 days. The nurses said she was the funniest. She cracked them up. She was a funny lady anyway, but she spent time in the hospital, and they finally let her go, and the doctor didn't
Really know what to do for her.
Well, he didn't know. They didn't know there was nothing you can do. What do you do when somebody eats too much weed? You just stand by and watch and see what happens. Anyway, it was quite an adventure.
I love the multiple references to Volkswagen buses.
I know. I was just thinking that, like, when I was growing up, we had multiple of them, and they lived in the yard until not too long ago, actually. But there was a moment I was thinking about stories about the road, and there was one year where I think my dad had two 20-foot boards in the car, and so the road was so bad. At that point, you got out and you moved the boards to the front. You drove over that. You picked up the other set. You put it in front, and that's how you got to town and back. Yeah.
Not on a school morning.
Not on a school morning.
Well, we have just a few more minutes. Is there a real pressing question that might have a short answer?
No short answers.
All right. Yes. Casey, you were talking about how just sometimes being a farmer, whether it's food or cannabis, you get smacked down and you have to climb back out of it. And it seems like too many of those smackdowns you can't climb back out of it, no matter how much you want to. So I'm just wondering if there are things that we can do as a larger community to help make those smackdowns easier for everybody, so that you can survive sustainably and continue to provide the kind of sustenance that we need to provide.
It's a great question.
Yeah.
It's like it's the old saying, you're a gardener until you sell something, right? And so as a farmer, like I go to farmers market every week, and if I take stuff home with me, that's stuff that didn't sell. So shop local, buy local, support farmers, and one of the things that I think is so great to see over time is like, we've always kind of had, Don mentioned, we've always kind of had this culture of like, what do you do to make a few bucks? And so I really see that happening with the Mendot Lake Food Hub and the growth of small local farmers and people being able to distribute produce and get it where it needs to go. And I think that the market match program is incredible. And it's interesting, the income thresholds for EBT are set in such a way that a lot of people qualify. I don't think everybody knows that. But if you qualify for EBT, you can take your EBT card to the farmer's market and you can double your money. So you take $30 off your card, you get $60 in farmer's market dollars. And like dollar for dollar government spending, I think it's the most effective thing in the world, because then local food is all of a sudden on par or even cheaper than store-bought food, and farmers take home money. And so it's, you know, it's a really great program. So, you know, shop local, support local farmers, and support the youth.